In 1973, the history discipline at Flinders University introduced assessment procedures which included exams in first year and third year topics, including a compulsory 3-hour exam in History 1. In June 1974, student activists distributed a questionnaire to 280 History 1 students, asking them about exams. The majority of respondents, 139 to 13, wanted the exam abolished. On the afternoon of the 31st of July 1974, a group of students occupied the staff common room in the Social Sciences building with the intention of staying there until the history discipline accepted their demands about the abolition of compulsory exams.
At the end of the meeting, they voted that they'd take some direct action, which was to occupy the staff common room of the Social Sciences faculty at the time and use that sort of occupation and inconvenience to staff as a bit of a lever to try and get staff to come to the party to talk about compulsory exams. Sounds like a small issue, but it was part of a movement there, and students were radicalised anyway because of the Vietnam issues and some of the other things going on campus. And when they couldn't get staff to hold reasonable discussions of what they felt were reasonable discussions, they then moved to the University Registry building, the administration building, and started by occupying the council chambers, where the University Council met once a month, and things sort of went on from there, which we'll talk about later.
The whole campus was pretty divided, and it was quite a divisive time. I mean, both sides, I guess, got a little bit entrenched, and it was you're either with us or you're against us.
I was teaching at the time. I came out to the corridor from my office, and I remember the aftermath of this meeting, Professor Moore walking along the passage looking very angry and quite anguished, with a trail of students behind him, and they were tailing him around, refusing to let him go back to his office. I didn't know what was happening, and I sort of gave him a cheerful smile and said hello, and he walked past, and then I realised that he was followed by a large body of radical students. From then on, things escalated.
It was very much a power issue between the staff have the power, the students don't. The students should have more of that power, and the staff should have less of that power.
We don't stop people working. We won't stop people working. No, we're not. Will you listen? Will you listen to me? We've done it for 3 weeks. We've listened to you. People grabbed their bags under their arms, their papers, whatever they had at the meeting, and marched with everything they had at the meeting up to the staff common room and just walked in. And I remember some staff member saying, "You can't come in here, or you're not supposed to be in here." And people laughed at him and said, "Well, we're here and we're in here and we're staying until you discuss getting rid of compulsory history exams." And I think the staff were flabbergasted that students were doing it A, over that issue, and B, daring to come into their sort of inner sanctum. We definitely got that sort of feeling at the time.
I was involved in the delegation. It was first sent to talk to Professor Moore, who agreed to see us when we went to see him one morning. And by the time we got to see him back later on that afternoon, he'd actually flown to Melbourne. So people were pretty grumpy about that, and basically sat down in the corridor in the social science building saying, well, basically, I think the words were something along the lines of, "Fuck you," and the horse you came in on, and we're not bloody moving until we get some answers here. Well, of course, there was nobody to answer the questions because none of the lecturers were going to come and talk to us.
I think that the immediate reaction of everybody was not quite shock, but more bemusement. This had never happened in Flinders. No one knew quite what to do. The administration tried to talk the students into going home. I should say the Vice-Chancellor, Roger Russell, was overseas at the time in America. They wouldn't, so everybody locked up their offices and went home.
At about 5 p.m, a group of students took over the council room on the top floor of the registry building. On the 1st and 2nd of August 1974, a Thursday and Friday, overnight, students climbed through the ceiling to enter the offices of the Registrar and the Vice-Chancellor.
At that time, the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Russell, was abroad, and Professor Clark, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor, was acting Vice-Chancellor, and he arrived at my office in the School of Social Sciences, along with the Registrar, Howard Buchan, saying that they'd been evicted from their offices in the registry.
Basically the Americans were on the run, and the protest movement was on the increase in Australia and New Zealand and the States and so forth then. So things were there were big demonstrations, 10,000 people in Adelaide and things like that.
There were offshoots of radicalism from that. I mean, it was the time of the beginning of the feminist movement. But it was also a time when I think education itself was under question in terms of the power relationships involved.
Well, what are the real issues?
The real issues are firstly that the students in this occupation wish to have a real say in determining their assessment procedures, and well, this extends even further in determining aspects of the whole course like content and assessment procedures, etc. And our second thing is that we want the history exams made optional for 1974.
And what was being asked for was peer assessment. And philosophy had instituted a system of peer assessment. And so other students who perhaps did philosophy, or perhaps knew people who did philosophy, started saying, we want to challenge the power relationships in education. We want to have peer assessment too.
The real issue, Elizabeth, is the quality of education and how you carry it out.
On the part of people who were at the traditional end of the spectrum, there was a concern that the movement to the what I might call less rigorous forms of assessment risked a lowering of standards.
My own experience as a student, I can say that whilst a lot of exams weren't all that stressful, I found a few of them very stressful.
What's an exam after all? It's not the end of the world. When I was young, I was assessed by examinations all the time, and I didn't complain. And I think I do believe, and did believe then, that examinations are a useful component of the assessment process.
I mean, you can have a situation where some kind of uprising is possible. You can have a situation where it's even likely. But to actually make it happen nearly always takes a leader or leaders.
He's an interesting man, Dave McPherson. He's definitely someone who became very passionate about things, and often feared for whether he had suffered from being involved in student politics, perhaps in a way that other people hadn't. I think he was actually targeted by the police a little bit for some retribution, which was unfair and unproductive.
Dave McPherson would be probably the only really charismatic leader I've ever come across. He was a really exuberant, engaging kind of person, and it's not surprising to me that people liked him and were influenced by him.
We've got 100 students here. Now, it's a fairly full-time thing to occupy a registry. The students here are only some of the students who feel strongly about examinations, about student participation and staff participation in decision-making. I think when you say a few people are interrupting the whole university, in fact I think we're representing the views of quite a lot of students at the university.
We had to feed people, we had to house people, we had to control where we went, the use of the loos and all that sort of stuff. So there was some nuts and bolts organising going on at the time. We had a rotating chair, we made sure it was gender equal and things like that, all those sorts of things back. This is 30 years ago we were doing this too. And I think we arranged for people to sort of organise details for going and collecting food and bringing it back and getting it out to people. All that sort of stuff was going on as well.
I mean, a mob of people, a group of people, go into the registry and your first thought is, oh, they'll trash it, they'll burn it, they'll do all sorts of things. It wasn't the case at all. It was extremely orderly. People who messed up got thrown out. The decisions as to what to do were made not by one or two individuals, but by the general student meeting in the council room.
We were really clear we were going to be super democratic, that everyone was going to have their say, that we'd record all the views, that we tried to reach, we had a consensus policy, only having a vote if you absolutely had to make a decision by a certain time and you couldn't reach some resolution, share the chairing around.
The mood of the students occupying the registry building today was defensive and suspicious. It took several hours for them to agree to allow TDT into the council room to film for a few minutes. And even then we were told we couldn't speak to any students except those officially nominated. The two spokesmen explained that their caution was due to the fact that they considered they were being misrepresented by the press and media.
Well, we feel that they have emphasised the sensational aspects of our occupation, like the files and Sir Mark Oliphant coming down and his intervention, rather than the real issues.
Later on, the university administration turned off all the power to the building, so we had no power whatsoever. We hired a Honda diesel or petrol-driven generator and had it chugging away outside just outside on the balcony, on the ledge, on the second floor of the university administration building to run some power for a bit of cooking and that. But we decided we wanted to use one of their printing presses at the time, so we thought, okay, we'll hook up the generator and the power leads to the printing press. But the load it drew was so big, it blew up the printing press and sparks and things went everywhere. All our lights went out. The generator was crapped out. So it was that was quite some of the things like that happened were sort of amusing looking back at them.
Now there are 3,000 students here at Flinders and there are about 100 of you in here. You have the switchboard, you have this office. You're disrupting the whole university. Aren't you worried about how the other students are going to suffer from this?
Yes, we are, but we have made definite attempts right through this occupation to communicate with these students and explain our position, and we feel that they do agree with the issues that we're fighting for.
You have to do exams to test how good you are, otherwise how can they know for sure that they've passed satisfactorily?
Do you approve of the action they're taking in there?
No.
Why not?
I think that it's not their property, it's public property and they've got no right to take it over.
I'm in sympathy with their move, but I think they might be a bit extreme in what they're doing, and I think this could be counterproductive.
Oh, I couldn't care less what they do, really. I'm not really interested.
Do you think it's right that they've broken into files and have occupied the building?
Not there to break into.
Well, I think their aims are reasonable, but I think their methods are wrong. And the reason I think their methods are wrong is because I think they're incompatible with the lifestyle that Jesus Christ set up for us. And that was a lifestyle of non-violence, but of love.
Unfortunately, it was impossible to gauge more reaction from students as loudspeakers blaring across campus warned that we had no permission to speak to them. Meanwhile, back in the council room, the students prepared to meet Mr. Justice Bright for more discussions. At the moment, the university has agreed that the question of assessment is open for discussion.
On the afternoon of Friday, the 2nd of August 1974, students took over the telephone switchboard at Flinders University.
Yeah, we decided we want to occupy the telephone exchange, which is in the basement of the building, 4 floors below where we were. And the staff had heard about this and they'd locked the telephone operators in there, so we couldn't get in. But so what they hadn't worked out is there was a suspended ceiling about 2 foot below the real concrete ceiling, and some students went in further down the corridor, climbed up and through one of the panels in there, climbed along and dropped down into the telephone operator's thing. And I was one of the students that was up there. I wasn't the first one to drop down into the operator's area, and to see the look on the telephone operators' faces as these students sort of landed with a thump through the ceiling behind them was quite hilarious. And that was quite interesting, because what we did then, we decided, well, we're really going to go for it now. We're going to tell the whole country, if not the whole world, what's going on. And we used the telephone system to make calls to student associations at every Australian university, plus some international ones over in England and the States, to say what was going on, ask for messages of support and things like that.
I think a key to understanding the occupation was that it was just incredibly successful and very, very quickly. And events went a lot faster than people could keep up with. The initial thoughts were that they might occupy the registry for a day, a couple of days, and nothing happened to make them move, so they didn't.
On the weekend, the 3rd to 4th of August, the entire building was occupied. The windows were covered and doors were secured with wire and chains. Academic and general staff at the university refused to negotiate under duress.
This is the sort of people that they're out to destroy this university. They're not interested in history exams. They're just out to destroy the university, because they know that the university itself is part of the bastions of a free democratic society. If they can destroy that, then that's exactly what they want. At this time they've been beaten because the people as a whole just wouldn't stand for such nonsense. Most of the history students quit a long time ago, and over the weekend those that were here found that the meetings were being stacked, that WSA people were coming in from outside, people who hadn't even been in the occupation were coming in from outside and voting at the meetings for those poor kids to stay on, and then they'd leave again. And when the history students wanted to call a meeting and have a vote, if it was obvious to the few SA people who were here that they wouldn't have a majority, they would stall and say, look, we haven't got enough people for a meeting, let's have another one tomorrow. And this is the tactics that they used to keep this occupation going long after it should have ended.
Among the students were some troublemakers, as we saw them. The leading troublemaker being David McPherson, who at that stage was Secretary of the Students' Association.
No matter how liberal they appear, the staff, and especially the senior staff and the professors and the Vice-Chancellor, they decide what happens, and don't worry about what anyone else thinks. There isn't any real democracy. Ordinary staff find that too in universities, and that sort of thing is still going on nowadays. I'm not saying the occupations and that sort of action, but universities are very much top-down affairs.
In other words, we have consultative powers, but we have very, very limited powers of decision-making. And this, I think, is one of the reasons why discussion merely seems like more of the same thing.
How much longer do you intend to occupy this building?
Until our demands are met.
If the students had listened harder in their revolutions course, they would know that you actually have to control the means of physical force that a state can bring to bear if you're going to actually be successful in some revolutionary way. And they didn't control that. And I didn't see that the department, I felt the department would be even less likely to change its attitude under that kind of pressure.
On Monday the 5th of August, Governor Mark Oliphant, who also held the position of visitor to the university, came to Flinders to negotiate with students. The negotiations were unsuccessful. On Tuesday, August the 6th, Governor Oliphant offered his resignation from the post, but he was persuaded by Premier Don Dunstan to change his mind.
I came down from up above with a couple of other students to talk with this Governor-General to see what he wanted with us, basically, at this door, and he was a very abrupt, sort of crusty old gentleman. I think the Poms would call him a boring old fart. It's sort of that type of person, and he demanded to be let in to tell the students to get out of the place. And we basically said, no, bugger off. And he wouldn't leave. And I remember Brian Whelan, this guard there, I think he tried to push him out the door and barred his, that's right, Oliphant tried to walk in past him, and Brian just stood in his way and barred his way. And this is the governor of the state, grabs Brian's long hair and yanks it. So they were, and in the end, we physically pushed him out of the door.
I get my foot out of the door to be pretty good too.
There's no need to be
Excuse me, chap. Could you open the door a little bit so I can get my foot free from this thing? Well, if you don't believe me, I'll stand here. It's quite all right with me. Unless you open the door a little bit, I can't get my foot out. Thank you.
So, boys, I ask you nothing as yet. We're going away to talk, we're coming back again, and I ask you not to intervene in any way in what is quite a delicate situation. Thank you.
He heightened their sense of their importance. And who else could have the governor of the state turn out, as in their perception, as a negotiator with them? So they saw themselves as having become supremely important, and it made life very difficult for us thereafter.
The student occupiers announced they would open the filing cabinets of Vice-Chancellor Professor Roger Russell, one every hour, until the history discipline agreed to discuss the question of compulsory exams.
One thing I should say now, this issue had gone way past compulsory history exams by then, because when we opened the Vice-Chancellor's files, we discovered a whole lot of letters of contract, appointment, briefs for research that showed he'd been doing chemical warfare research for the US Defence Department in the late 50s and through the 60s, and these were all in his files. So it turned, especially because of the anti-Vietnam sort of feeling, the anti-Vietnam War feeling at the time, anti-American feeling, this turned into a campaign to get rid of the Vice-Chancellor, because he was, basically we called him a war criminal for the Americans.
I remember Ron Whitten, who was a sociologist, started to argue that there was some deep and sinister purpose in Roger Russell having been appointed the Vice-Chancellor of Flinders University. In fact, perhaps this was a move by the CIA or the FBI or something rather to infiltrate academic culture and make us more amenable to funding by defence agencies and so on.
This was an issue that had been bubbling along on the left for some time, following the discovery by a sociology lecturer, Ron Whitten, of material in the US indicating that Roger Russell might have been involved in such activities. And they'd written to him and he declined to answer them in any specifics. They took advantage of the occupation when his office was taken over to go through his files and find material that they thought added to that case, and found his diaries and so on.
About 2 weeks after the commencement of the occupation, Vice-Chancellor Professor Roger Russell returned to Adelaide from America, where he'd been on business overseas. On the 28th of August, about 400 staff members broke into the registry, dismantled barricades and ejected the remaining 50 occupants.
It was a counter demonstration.
Fizzled out to a certain extent.
They just ended it effectively by force.
So there's some quite threatening behaviour from the staff, threatening to, in one case, threatening to rape one of the women. We had a couple of women with us there. You know, there were some things like that were going on. Some really heavy. We were quite scared for our safety by then. The staff had worked themselves up, the ones that were involved in this, to such a froth that not even people on their side, I don't think, could control them.
There was quite a bit of violence against personal property. A lot of students' material found in the building was thrown out the windows, and there was some, not hefty, but some violence and heavying of students physically.
You say the man that you get out of the building. You don't get the man.
Several hundred students started, as they heard the news, started gathering below the university on the sort of roadway outside, and we managed to, we had a megaphone with us, and we were telling them through a window what was going on as these staff were trying to smash down the door into this last room we were in. It was quite a small storeroom, you know, about the size of a bedroom really, with 11 of us I think in there.
And the situation did get out of hand and police were called, I think a couple of occasions. When we negotiated essentially the exit of the students out of the union building, and as they exited, the academic staff who claimed to have been assaulted were there to identify who it was that had claimed to assault them, but the main people that they were looking for didn't emerge from the union building, and police with dogs did not find them in the union building.
In the end, some wiser heads prevailed on the other side, and we sort of negotiated a peaceful exit, and we're sort of like the 11 of us trooped out down the gauntlet of the line of staff holding clubs and chair legs and all sorts of, you know, crowbars in some cases. This is, yeah, quite incredible at the time, but feelings were so high, you know, then on both sides. But students were really angry, and we had probably 400 or 500 students had gathered in the holidays late this afternoon. Remember my psychology professor, Professor Gibbs, being one of the people leading the charge. This is amazing. These are professors and technicians and all sorts leading the charge up the stairs towards us, and right at the top of the landing and the top floor, quite close to the University Administration Building, was a huge big plaster of Paris relief and sort of map of the university, heavy bugger, and I think 3 or 4 of us managed to lift it, and we hurfed it over the rail down the stairwell on these staff advancing about a floor below us. And I remember Professor Gibbs, he was eating a hamburger at the time. He thought it was a huge joke. He was a weird character anyway. Other students will probably remember him. The look of horror on his face as this huge heavy thing hurtled down towards him. They got out of the road in time. No one was actually hurt. It was sort of quite hilarious. I later got arrested and charged with assaulting this guy for doing that. I was the only one that I think got arrested for that, or certainly the only one charged and ended up in court on that. And it was called the case of the crushed hamburger, because he claimed that he had been assaulted, and the evidence of the assault was the fear that caused him to crush his hamburger, he said in evidence.
And David Gibbs said, well, I know I was in fear because after it was over, I went to eat my hamburger, and I discovered that in my fear I had crushed the hamburger. And David McPherson turned to the magistrate and said, Your Honour, I'm a little bit confused here. Am I being charged with assaulting David Gibbs or with assaulting his hamburger?
when I left Flinders, I had learned, and many of my colleagues had learned, how to organise a public meeting, how to control a public meeting, how to determine an agenda, how to write minutes, how to set up a new organisation, how to write a constitution for an organisation, basically how to operate in the world to get things done, to change things. And those social and political skills have been as important to me in my career as anything I learnt in the formal curriculum, I think.
I suspect by the end of the occupation there were a lot of people who thought they could change the world.